Alright, and we're back. Hello, hello to all. We're here today with another commander from Magic the Gathering's most recent collaborative release with Avatar: The Last Airbender. Here today with Firelord Azula. Now, Azula is the latest in a long line of Grixis commanders that have popped into the cEDH meta. Now, before we proceed, just for full disclosure, I guess, I'm well aware that more than likely she won't quite reach the same heights as the premier Grixis option, that is Rog Silas in the Turbo cEDH archetype. Azula is likely to lie somewhere further down in power level, more akin to more recent options such as Green Goblin or perhaps Kefka. Now, she's not as good of a mid-range option as Kefka, as we'll discuss further later. But she does still offer some unique things, which I think make her worth exploring in her own right, even if, as a whole, taken together as a package, they do not end up being as powerful as some of the other things we could be doing. Because these unique things are pretty cool and aren't something that's easily replicated elsewhere. So, Firelord Azula for 1, a blue, a black, and a red is a legendary creature human noble, 4/4, with Firebending 2, which reads, whenever this creature attacks, add red red to your mana pool. This mana lasts until end of combat. And as well, she says, whenever you cast a spell while Firelord Azula is attacking, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the new copy. And of course, this copying effect is the main draw to playing Azula. So not only when she attacks does she make 2 red mana that you can spend during that entire combat phase, but she copies any spell that you're able to cast. So any instants get copied, quite obviously, but also if you're able to cast permanents with flash, or give your permanents and sorceries flash through other means, then you get token copies of those cards. So obviously creating copies is very powerful. These aren't temporary copies that go away at the end of your turn or anything, they stick around entirely. But as well, these copies will go onto the stack above the original spell that is cast, which is relevant for several of her combo lines. And quite obviously, copying spells just makes your must counter kinds of spells in this Grixis archetype, such as Ad Naus, Necropotence, that kind of thing, that much harder to interact with, since your opponents will need to have 2 pieces of stack interaction rather than just 1. So yeah, that's Azula. So let's move into the deck check. So the Grixis shell generally is considered to be somewhat of a solved shell, so most of the core Grixis cards you will find are in this list, but I will go over some of the additional features that have been added that kind of play off of their synergy with Azula's abilities. Now, her key weakness, of course, is that she's kind of telegraphed. She is a 4-mana commander, so she's not that easy to spit out on turn 2 or turn 3. She has 3 colored pips after all. But she doesn't have haste, and she has to attack to get her trigger, right? So even after casting Azula and putting her onto the board, you have to wait a full turn cycle to make use of her abilities. So as a result, this list is not particularly heavily built around Azula. You have that classic Grixis score to kind of play with, and then Azula's there as a bit of a fallback with some small synergy options to kind of improve gameplay. So let's move on to our creature core. So we have 15 creatures here, of which 14 are real creatures. One of them is Simian Spirit Guide, which is effectively just a red ritual for when you're comboing off. Helps you get a faster Azula, higher chances of turn 2 Azula, and when you're going off of Adnaz or Necropotence acts as a free mana outlet that does not cost you a spellcast. It's slightly painful off of Adnaz since it does ding you for 3, but it is definitely worth it. So there's a couple different categories of cards here. Some flash creatures to get some value, as well as mana generating combo enablers, and just some generic utility cards. So first up we have Abeloth Spawn. This is one of my flex slots, just testing this card for now. I do think that it's particularly good in my local metagame, which sees quite a bit of efficient ETB effects. Think Orcish Bowmasters, Thassa's Oracle for the premier ones, but also stuff like Hoarding Broodlord, even the occasional thing like stealing a Derevi untap, that sort of thing. So Abeloth Spawn is a 2 and a blue for a 2/3 fish horror with flash. It has ward 2, so it has some defense against getting picked off with spot removal. And it reads, whenever a creature entering the battlefield under an opponent's control causes a triggered ability of creatures to trigger, you may copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this is here to kind of steal ETBs. Just a cute example is, say, if someone flashes in a Orcish Bowmaster, you can flash in your Abeloth Spawn in response on top, and if it resolves and sits on the board, then when the OBM gets its ETB trigger, you can shoot it back in response. The other cute one is flashing Abeloth Spawn in response to someone casting their own Thassa's Oracle. So you gotta put it onto the board before it triggers its ETB, obviously. So you cast in response to the spellcast, not in response to the ETB trigger. And so that would presumably happen on your opponent's turn. So then you got your non-active player, non-active player turn order for priority, which means your copied, stolen Thassa's Oracle trigger will go onto the stack on top of theirs, which will allow you to go off with your own Demonic Consult on top of their win attempt. Now, that being said, this is, of course, the ceiling case for Abeloth Spawn. It is still a 3 mana 2/3 that kind of does nothing on its own. Now, if you do manage to flash it in during combat, you'll get 2 Abeloth Spawns, which means you get to double up on your opponent's ETB triggers. But it is still a 3 mana card that doesn't contribute to your actual winning combo lines. Nevertheless, I'm kind of testing this. This is kind of in the same vein as Opposition Agent, which is not in the list, you will note. You could have 2 Opposition Agents during combat as well to kind of steal tutors in combat. But I just find with these game plan forward, proactive Grixis turbo lists that Opposition Agent is entirely unnecessary, and it could well be that Abeloth Spawn is in the same vein, but I'm just testing it. There's definitely a flex spot. You can play any number of cards that I'm considering in its place instead. Next we have Birgi. She's one of our mana outlets. Just a good general Grixis card. Whenever you cast a spell, add red, and you don't lose that mana as phases end. Alternatively, of course, you have the alt mode, which lets you discard cards to exile cards, potentially giving you gas in a game where you're very, very gassed out. We'll go over the rest of the mana outlets since we're there. So that'd be Electro, as well as Stormkiln and Vivi. So we have 3 of the outlets at 3 mana. Electro is basically the same as Birgi, except he doesn't trigger off of any spell. It's just instants or sorceries. He has that same line of text that lets you keep mana throughout phases. However, his trigger lets you keep mana through turns even, so you can actually bank mana. You can bank any red mana basically throughout turns. And then we have Vivi, who's kind of a bit special here. So what you'll find with Azula, or what I've found actually, is that when you're combing off, you have lots of abilities to make red mana. Her Fire Breathing ability makes red mana. And Birgi and Electro make red mana. But oftentimes the choke point for casting spells and continuing to cast spells if you're trying to combo off during Azula's combat step to take advantage of her copy trigger is that you're missing out on blue mana and to a lesser extent black mana. That's because there's no blue rituals. Now, you got stuff like Desperate Ritual, Pyretic Ritual, Seething Song to make red mana and double up on that. And then in black you have Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, but there's no equivalent in blue. So Vivi, with his 0 ability to add X mana in any combination of red or blue, is an outlet to make blue mana when you're casting spells, which in and of itself is quite useful. You can use this ability once per turn, but there's no timing restriction other than that, so you can use it in combat. And then you have this secondary paying effect. And last but not least, from the mana generators, you got Stormkill Artist. Stormkill Artist is a bit special. It does cost 4 mana, so it is incredibly annoying to cast in a way. But if you can get away with getting Stormkill onto the board in combination with Azula, he's obviously very powerful, since he has that Magecraft ability that gives you a treasure every time you cast or copy. So if you have Stormkill and Azula out, then you're getting 2 treasures per spell you're putting on the stack, more or less. And like I said, you have trouble getting your colored pips other than red in this list, so treasures are very valuable. Next we have Dolphy. Dolphy is just like a hate piece for graveyards, quite obviously. Costs black black, which can be a bit of a problem sometimes. But as well, you have the activated ability of Dolphy Voidwalker, which lets you sacrifice it to cast any spell that's under it. So this can let you cast any spells that are under it inside that combat window. This could just be something defensive, like some random counterspell that's caught underneath it, to protect your Azula during your combat turn, or anything else like that. Could be some random ad naus that someone had to discard to hand size or something in that vein. So just a useful hate bear that also happens to have some combo potential. DRC is just here for some good value, some good filtering. Cast spells, put spells into the yard, or put cards into the yard. We are a breach tech after all, so generates breach fuel and generates some card selection. Because, and this is extremely helpful because Firelord Azula is a Grixis commander without any inherent card advantage. Now, Rogsai, the premier Grixis pairing, is also in this vein of not having card advantage, but at the very least, Rograk being a 0 mana commander is basically like a free Mox Ruby in combination with Mox Amber. He turns on Fierce, he turns on Deflecting Swat, he turns on Rollick if you're running that, he turns on Jessica's Will, right? These are things that Azula is not able to do, and oftentimes you're going to vomit out your hand of fast mana or rituals to kind of put Azula onto the board, and you'll be left with kind of fairly minimal payoff. Azula isn't like Kefka, where Kefka has access to card draw, but she's still 4 mana, so she's still slower than Rogsai. So having some form of card selection is very helpful. And yeah, he feels breach. Fairy Mastermind, just a nice flash value creature, just like Aboleth Spawn. Whenever an opponent draws their second card, you draw a card, so if you do manage to have the nice upside of flashing in a Fairy Mastermind during combat, first off you get a small discount because Azula will make 2 red mana, so you just have to pay 1 blue mana. And then you might end up with 2 Fairy Masterminds, which is obviously quite good. Kark we'll skip over and save for last. OBM, kind of the same deal as Fairy Mastermind. OBM does all the typical OBM things. If we're running Wheel of Fortune, that kind of thing, it can also become a combo outlet to where they end. But if you flash it in during combat, you get 2 OBMs. And yeah, it has all its normal applications of being flashed into response. Flashed in response to some other draw spell or draw effect from an opponent. Good in Mystic meta. Just like a generically good card overall. Acts as almost functionally a board wipe of small creatures, while denying your opponent's the ability to draw infinitely without an answer. Ragavan, just another value Ragavan here. Everyone should know what Rag does. Hits an opponent, makes a treasure, and exiles a top card. And notably, this combat damage step, after which you will be able to cast this card, is still considered to be in combat. So if you do hit on a spell that you can cast in that timing window, so during combat if it's an instant, or if you have a flash enabler and you cast that spell while you're still in combat, you will trigger Azula. Since after combat damage there still is a end of combat phase where you can use that timing window to cast spells with priority. SSG we went over, just free mana. Snapcaster Mage is another flash value creature. Pretty nice synergy with Azula's ability. Of course, if you flash it in during combat, you get 2 Snapcasters. That means you get to give 2 spells flashback. If you cast those spells from your yard during combat as their instance, then you also get copies of those spells. So some nice, easy synergies there. You can double up on rituals, double up on whatever. And as well, it's a important combo piece with Gifts Ungiven, which we can discuss further. It's in the Gifts Ungiven 4-card combo pile for a guaranteed Thassa's consult. So we'll discuss it later when we get to gifts. Then of course we've got Thoracle, classic Dimir or Grixis win option. If you have a flash enabler, you can put 2 Thoracles in the stack just to get a bit of guaranteed. You can get some guaranteed or more guaranteed triggers, doubling up on the Thoracle. And it's also kind of especially good in some ways because of the combo lines it has with Tainted Pact, Electro Dominance, and some of the other cards in this list. But yeah, it's Thoracle. This is cEDH. It combos with Tainted Pact and Demonic Consult. I don't know what else there is to add really at this point. Valley of Bloodcaller, standard flash outlet. You'll note we're not running High Fate Trickster. I think 4 mana is just a bit too much, but Valley of Bloodcaller at 3 mana definitely is worth it. Flash outlet for your Necropotence lines, for your combat step ad nauseum. Very powerful effect, notably, because if you can get your fast mana in the form of mana rocks and cast them during combat with a Flood Caller on the board, you get copies of everything like your Lotus Petal, your Chrome Mox, your Mox Amber, Mox Opal. Now, with Mox Amber, Mox Opal, you're going to lose one of the copies to state-based effects because of the Legend rule. But so just make sure that after the copy resolves, you tap it for mana before the original resolves. Otherwise, there will not be a timing window, I believe, where you can tap for mana before the Legend rule takes effect. So that's our creature suite. It is a bit swollen. You will note on some other lists that are floating out there, you might see that they're a bit more trim. And I do agree this is like a bit of a more swollen list. So I wouldn't blame you for basically cutting everything that's not a 3-drop or everything that is 3-drop or higher other than Valley Floodcaller. Like there is some merit to trimming Burgi, Electro, VV, and Stormkill because they are slow, and this is a turbo list. But personally, I'm trying out my first draft with these mana enablers to get a little more consistent combo turns and seeing how that goes. But you would be more than valid in cutting all these expensive cards and running more trim cards in their place. Before we move on, let me talk about Quark. So why is Quark here? This 1 and a red 2/2 legendary Goblin that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, flip a coin. If you lose a flip, return that spell. If you win, copy that spell. Well, I mean, the synergy should be apparent with Azula, but more or less, what Kark does is he gives you a way to really kind of take extra advantage of Azula's trigger. So if you have Kark and Azula on the board, which should be incredibly frightening to your opponents, if you have a spell, or an instant or sorcery specifically, if you have a flash enabler for your sorceries, you're always going to be able to get a copy from Azula. She's always going to give you a copy. And then if you lose the flip, Kark will return that spell to your hand, and you can try again, at which point you'll get another guaranteed flip. So this lets you go quite crazy with certain spells, especially rituals. So let's just use this Desperate Ritual as an example. I have Kark and Azula on the board. Azula attacks, she makes 2 red mana. I cast Desperate Ritual with that red mana. Azula's triggers, makes a guaranteed copy. Kark triggers, and let's say you lose a flip, right? So the original goes back to your hand. Your copy from Azula resolves. You make 3 red mana. Well, now you have 3 red mana to cast that Desperate Ritual in your hand again, right? So you go down to 1 red mana. Azula will give you a guaranteed copy, put you up to 4 mana, and Kark will either put it back into your hand again, and you can try again, going net plus 1 mana, or he will you'll win the flip, and you'll suddenly have 10 red mana out of nowhere, right? So this is a pretty powerful interaction. This applies as well to Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual. And this is just rituals, right? If you have any cantrips in your list, my list is kind of light on cantrips, but if you're running like a Brainstorm, a Consider, that kind of thing, you could potentially be drawing 2, 3, 4 cards off of just one single cantrip. And so this is a pretty powerful interaction. There'll be some moments where it's not that convenient, like if you're trying to resolve an ad nause and Karkas bouncing the original in your hand. Well, it could be good actually as well. Maybe that's not the best case because you'll get a copy off Azula, and then maybe you get an ad nause back into your hand to try again, rather than having 3 copies that your opponents need to counter. But yeah, if you really need to actually resolve that ad nause, it could potentially be a problem if your opponents have counter magic. But I think, even though it seems a bit silly, the upside outweighs the downsides of sometimes not resolving your spells. So that's why Kark earns a slot. Moving on to our sorceries. Just a nice trim 6 here. I have removed quite a few of the sorceries that you're commonly going to see here. Like there's no Praetor's Grasp. Though I do think Praetor's Grasp is like a pretty valid card here. I just couldn't find a spot for it because of some of the cards I'm testing. And I personally have cut Wheel of Fortune. Now, Wheel of Fortune is one of the better payoffs, I think, for a card you can just jam out there after dumping out your hand. It is a way to reload after spending all your fast mana on Firelord Azula. I just wasn't liking the way it played in terms of play patterns because filling everyone's hands full of interaction when you need to get to combat and all that wasn't working out for me personally. Now, it is worth pointing out that we have the ability to get double Bowmaster here, so Wheel could be extremely deadly in that regard, but I'm personally choosing not to run it here. I think it would be, that might not be correct. I'm running a stock up in that position. Like Wheel of Fortune is easier to cast because it's a red spell as well, and is a more powerful effect than stock up when it's good. I'm just choosing to test without it for now. And lastly, another card I cut was Mnemonic Betrayal. You'll find most of these cards that I cut in the sideboard, by the way. And Meme Bet I just cut because I find it's just a bit too swingy. It's not that valuable in the pods I tend to play with in my local meta, but if you're playing in a very like Grixis storm heavy meta game, you might find it as actually quite good for you. So I find it's just a meta call, but I have cut it from my list because there are not often that many graveyards with spells that I want to cast at the moment. Now, with that aside, these are the sorceries that I am running. You have your standard tutors. Demonic Tutor probably should be running Imp Seal here. I will try and find a cut at some point with one of my test cards, I think, to get Imperial Seal back in here. But not here for now. Jessica's Will, just pretty good value. In this list, it's not that strong because, again, Azula is a 4 mana commander, so it's not that often that you'll be able to get both modes. But even just as a powerful red ritual, it's a pretty strong card and merits a slot. Reanimates here almost entirely because it's part of that guaranteed gifts ungiven pile. Now it does get some good value, especially if you can get a flash enabler and get a double reanimate in combat. Just be aware that that loss of life is part of the resolution of the spell, so you will have to pay life or lose life twice if you have 2 copies. So be careful not to go too overboard on paying life to reanimate. Rite of Flames here, just as the worst red ritual, but also like the easiest one to kind of cast because it's 1 red pip turns into 2. Nice way, just like Saving Spirit Guide, to get a easier turn 2 or turn 3 Azula. Stock ups here as my card selection effect, replacing Wheel of Fortune. Kind of make use of all your fast mana. Now you can't cast this during combat that easily. If you have a flash enabler, then it is pretty darn strong. But even without that, The idea is that you have so much redundancy in the Grixis shell that 5 looks at 2 cards is going to find you something to do after you've cast your Azula, if that's the game plan you're on. Just a strong card selection spell. And then Yogg-Will is just like, well, it's Yogg-Will. I I don't know what there is to explain really. Just lets you recycle any spells in your yard. If you cast it pre-combat, well then during combat you can cast any number of instants that are in your yard. Yada yada. You don't need 2 copies with Azula, so you just need 1 copy of that effect basically. Quite strong. Alright, moving on to our instants. So we have our normal counterspell suite. We have Offer, which also doubles up as a ritual in some instances. Fierce, Fluster, Force of Will. And then I'm also running Narcissus Reversal, Pact of Negation, Swan Song, and Sync. You'll notice the notable exclusion of Force of Negation, and that's because Force of Negation is not on during your own turn for the free cast mode, which makes it more or less an entirely defensive spell. And so for that reason, I've chosen to omit it from the list and run different kinds of interaction instead in its place. Other than the defensive counter spells, which do get doubled up during if you manage to cast them during combat and use them defensively in that way, or I guess technically it'd be offensively in that way, which makes all the free counter magic especially powerful, especially like Fierce and that kind of thing, because your opponents need to have 2 pieces of stack interaction to go on top. So yeah, counter spells have a bit of extra utility. They all come with 1 replicate trigger, let's say, during combat, which is pretty cool. Got Ad Naus, standard Grixis combo outlet. This is not the best Ad Naus list. Like right now, my list is hovering at 1.39 CMC. So you're looking to draw about 20 to 25 cards with your Naus by the time you're casting it, but this is one of the premier combo outlets. And if you cast it during combat, it is an instant. You'll get a second copy. Now, resolving the second copy is obviously pretty useless. You just need to resolve 1, but that does mean that your opponents will need 2 pieces of counter magic to fight over your first Naus copy, which is a neat party trick. Next up, we have Big Score. Now, I'm running only one of this effect because it's very expensive. So it's 3 in a red, instant as an additional cost to cast the spell. Discard a card, draw 2, and create 2 treasure tokens. So obviously this is here as a payoff for Azula's trigger. If you manage to casting it during combat, you might end up with a draw 4, discard 1, make 4 treasures. So it's almost free in effect. And because it's making treasures, it's filtering red mana into treasures that you can track for your colors, which is pretty powerful in Azula. Like I said, I've found that making your colored pips is pretty difficult. Now, on the other hand, with Ad Naus, it's pretty painful, and it is a 4 mana spell that is fairly mediocre without your commander. But nevertheless, I've liked having 1 of this effect. This does have a functional reprint in Unexpected Windfall, but I think this effect isn't necessarily something that I want to see every game, so I haven't found a strong need to have more than 2 of this effect, even though I do think it is good. So I'm running the 1 for now. You could replace this with Unexpected Windfall if you happen to own that one over this one. They're basically the same card. Born Upon Wind, Flash Enabler, Cantrip, kind of bread and butter to the Turbo Necro strategy, and we are on Necropotence. In addition, with our cloned Ad Naus, this is also especially effective in letting you potentially clone Mana Rocks and flash out your Thoracle if you want to try and Thoracle in combat. Um, this is core to the current iterations of Grixis win at instant speed strategies, so don't have too much else to say about it. Just good bread and butter value, and it happens to cantrip, so you'll get 2 copies if cast in combat. Brain Freeze, standard Breach outlet. Right, you have your Breach Freeze combos in here. Brain Freeze, Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, or Lotus Petal. Go mana positive. Mill out your own library to fuel your Underworld Breach. Then you can mill out your opponent's, potentially go for a Thoracle win, or if your willing to take a little more risk, you can mill out your opponents or try to, and then try and have them draw with a draw effect, such as a flashed out Wheel of Fortune or like a Fairy Mastermind, have them draw from an empty library. That sort of thing. Cabal Ritual, Dark Ritual, your black rituals, pretty standard stuff. It go up on mana. Deflect and Swat is a free spell. Now, unless the stack is already kind of populated with spells, getting an extra copy of SWAT isn't always that useful, but it does mean that it is, again, a little harder to counter. You can redirect a counter spell to SWAT to kind of fizzle one if they're targeting one of your spells, or you can SWAT a Source of Plowshares targeting Azula away to something else, and if they happen to be doing something obnoxious in combat, which is a little more likely if you want to milk value out of deflecting SWAT, then you can get the double redirects and protect your spells in that way. Demand Answer is just a basic cantrip. One in the red, additional cost, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. This is probably the best version of this effect I found, and it's a good way to make use of Azula's 2 red mana. Because in effect this will become a 2 mana draw 4, discard 1. Consult is Consult, needs no explanation. Pretty standard combo line with Thoracle, assuming you don't, of course, exile your target in the top 6. And since Azula's copying spells, you have the combo line of casting Consult, naming Thoracle with the copy, resolve that, put Thoracle into your hand, then resolve the original, exile the rest of your library, and then you can main phase 2, cast Thoracle, win the game. Red Rituals, Desperate Ritual, Red Rituals are especially kind of high upside. Since Azula already makes red mana, you can turn your red mana into more red mana. Just a nice, easy piece. This one happens to be instant speed. Now, I'm not running Pyretic Ritual and Seething Song, didn't find room for them, but there is something to be said about making red mana. There's just no good outlet that I've found, however, so I haven't found the need to run the rest. Now, Electro Dominance is kind of a neat card with Azula. It is a 2-card win with Tainted Pact in hand, which is kind of unique to Azula if you can get to combat. So for Red X, it says Electro Dominance deals X damage to any target. You may cast a spell with mana value X or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So what you can do is you can cast Electro Dominance for X equals 2 with Tainted Pact in your hand, right? Copy of Electro Dominance goes on the stack. The copy casts Tainted Pact from your hand, right? So Azula will see the Tainted Pact and copy Tainted Pact. First a copy of Tainted Pact will go and exile your library until you find Thoracle. Then the original Tainted Pact will resolve, exiling the rest of your library. Now the original Electro Dominance for X equals 2 will resolve. Now at this point Thoracle has been placed into your hand by the copied Tainted Pact, and you can cast Thoracle for free off of the Electro Dominance with 2 copies at instant speed and win the game because your library will be empty. So nice, clean, compact win condition there with Tainted Pact in hand. This also works with Demonic Consultation, though just remember you still need to cast it for X equals 2, even though Demonic Consultation is a 1 mana spell, because the Thoracle that you're going to try and fetch is still a 2 mana spell. Obviously, if you miss on Thoracle and it's in your top 6 for the first consult resolving, you're going to be dead. But it is what it is. Fierce, free magic, counter magic is good. Final Fortune is another nice Grixis combo option. You often see this after a big like Necro turn or a big Ad Nauseam turn to kind of untap with your mana with a fully sculpted 7-card hand. Now Azula will be able to copy Final Fortune. This is of relatively minimal benefit since no matter what, after your first turn, you're going to lose the game. So even if you have 2 turns lined up, they each have a lose the game trigger on your end steps. So you're effectively only going to get 1 extra turn no matter what. But it does mean that if your opponents are trying to counter that Final Fortune, they will have to counter 2. Frantic Search and Narcissus Reversal are also another combo with Azula, which is also, and these individual cards are not embarrassing to be running, which is kind of why we're running them. But more or less, I think this combo is probably one of the more popular ones that's been explored with this commander. But you cast Frantic Search in combat with Azula, right? You draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands with the copy that goes on the stack. Now the original Frantic Search is on the stack. You cast your Narcissus Reversal, targeting the original Frantic Search. That Narcissus Reversal gets a copy put onto the stack. The copy of Narcissus Reversal targets your original Narcissus Reversal, returning it to your hand, and then creating another copy of Narcissus Reversal. This last copy of Narcissus Reversal targets the original Frantic Search, returning it to your hand and creating a copy of Frantic Search. And then you resolve your last Frantic Search, and you draw 2, discard 2, and untap 3 more lands again. And so you should be net plus 1 mana on the Frantic Narset, or you will have spent, I guess, 2 mana. And then when you finally resolve the copy, you'll be plus 1 colored mana off of your lands. And so in this way, you can draw 2, discard 2 through your entire library. Hopefully at some point while you're netting mana, you'll find your Born Upon a Wind, so that you can cast that and go up a card in hand, as well as gain flash, and eventually you'll dig and find your Thoracle and retain it in your hand while you continue to draw, discard, and cast on an empty library. Counter Magic Suite, just note for Pact of Negation, you will get a copy, so you'll get 2 counters, but you may or may not want to do that, depending on the situation. If you cannot win on that turn, it might not be advisable to copy that Pact of Negation because you will have to pay 10 if both copies resolve. So just something to be aware of. Running Lightning Bolt as some basic interaction, Into the Flood Maw as some permanent interaction. Oh, we skipped over Gifts Ungiven. So Gifts Ungiven, obviously getting 2 copies of Gifts is like pretty powerful. If your first copy, you can get a bunch of like counter magic and such to protect your actual combo line, and with the second copy, you can build the pile. So the pile is the standard Deemer pile of Reanimate, Thoracle, Snapcaster Mage, Demonic Consultation. Right, they're probably going to give you Snapcaster and Thoracle. So this gives you a blue, 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 black, and a colorless pile, right? Blue, blue for the Thoracle, blue and a colorless for Snapcaster, black for the flash-backed Demonic Consultation, to get a guaranteed Thoracle Consult. Pretty powerful card, obviously. If you clone it, you should probably win the game. Mystical Tutor. Now, the top of deck tutors, Mystical Tutor and Vampiric Tutor, are a bit awkward in that getting extra copies doesn't really do anything. But I will note that if you have a list with more cantrip density, you can cantrip in between the copies to put your first card into your hand first before you resolve your second copy. So, like, if you Mystical Tutor, you get a copy, resolve the copy, cast a Brainstorm in response to the second Mystical Tutor, draw that card with your Brainstorms, draw Blind with your Brainstorm copy, right? Then you get a second tutor, and then you get to tutor something else to the top. There's some manipulation to be done like that with Mystical Tutor. Red Blast, we're running Red Elemental Blast, not Pyroblast, just because this one's a bit harder to deflecting swat, and you have to pick a blue permanent. Now you are going to have an abundance of blue permanents, probably your Azula, right? But this is slightly more protected against those kinds of effects, so I've chosen to run Red Blast as my single Pyroblast effect. Couldn't find room for the Pyro itself. Redirect Lightning is another new redirect effect. Now it does cost 5 life, so it's not as great as here, since we are at the end of the day a Naws and Necro list. But it's cool. It's red. Costs red mana, right? So any red spells are easier to use during combat because Azula makes red mana. So it's an interesting experiment, at least. Might make the cut, might not. Sink into Stupor, just a good piece of interaction. It is a bit painful as a land, because it's a land that'll ding you for 3, and it also bolts you if you need it untapped. So in a Ad Naus Necro list, it is somewhat painful to be running it, but I personally find it to be nice to have this extra piece of interaction that just cakes a land slot. And it pitches the Force, so not too bad. Snap is like another free bounce spell, and in the case of Azula copying it during combat, it could also be a ritual even. And these untap your lands spells are rituals that help you produce that colored mana that's not red. So just generally a pretty good bounce spell. Serves doubles up as a ritual. Swan Song, Tainted Pact, we mentioned all the combos as another forbidden tutor, right? Exile your library, has all that sort of jazz with both Electro Dominance and Thoracle. Last Agni Kai included here as another ritual. So this is a new card as well. 1 in a red for an instant, target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. If that creature is dealt excess damage this way, add that much red mana, and then until end of turn, you don't lose unspent red mana as long as steps and phases end. So this is kind of a pseudo ritual with Azula. It's particularly useful if you're using it to pick off small creatures like Esper Sentinel or like Orcish Bowmaster, because if you have Azula fight, then this spell will make 3 mana, and if you do this during combat, then not only will you be able to keep Azula's spare red mana if there is spare red mana for some reason, you'll be able to get a second copy. Now be aware that the damage will stick around, so she can't fight that much. She's only a 4/4, but this is an interesting ritual slash removal spell, which is not a split card that we've really had access to before. Now, I don't know if it's going to end up being quite good enough. My suspicion is that it might be a bit too clunky. Oftentimes, you might want to use this to fight some fairly large creature, and that might kill Azula and not make mana. So it's a bit less reliable as a ritual. So if you find that it's not working for you, an easy swap is just to swap it for one of the red rituals I'm not running, like Pyretic or Seething Song. Untimely Malfunction is the third of our redirect spells. It's a modal spell, also has a destroy target artifact mode to help get rid of pesky stacks artifacts such as Damping Spear, or Damping Sphere, or like a Vexing Bauble, or some other irritating hate piece, and also serves to have another redirect effect, and importantly is a red spell, so it also gets cast off of Azla's red mana. And last but not least, Vamp Tutor is Vamp Tutor. It's just a good card in Grixis. What can I say? Rocks are wholly unremarkable. Basically, they all just make mana, just your standard fast mana pieces. I'm not running Grim Monolith or Basalt Monolith or the One Ring. There was a iteration of the build where I was running Ring and Monolith alongside a Manifold Key, but I ended up finding that that colorless mana, while useful in some cases, is overall not that helpful. So if it's not a mana positive rock like Soul Ring or like a huge burst of mana like Mana Vault, I wasn't finding it to be that useful overall. So they got cut from the list. And then the One Ring, well, this list is starred for card advantage. It's the 4 mana sorcery was just too clunky. It just wasn't what I wanted to be doing, especially once I took Manifold Key out of the list. You might find, if your meta is slow enough for it, that you miss having access to an effect like the One Ring, in which case you can put it back. At which point you might run like a tutor such as Beseech the Mirror to kind of find it. But for me, it wasn't working out that well, and a tutor like Beseech the Mirror with 3 black pips was incredibly hard to cast. So instead, we just have Witchclaw. One important thing to note about Witchclaw is that a lot of times you kind of shortcut to, but you may have a memory shortcut that it's sorcery speed, but it is not. Witchclaw reads, remove a witch counter. You can activate this only during your turn. So only during your turn includes combat. It's not like truly sorcery speed. So you can actually tutor at instant speed, put something into your hand, and then make the most out of Azula's combat trigger if you have the opportunity. Now for enchantments, kind of closing out here, very standard stuff for a Grixis pile. Got your 2 card advantage engines of Rhystic Mystic, right? And then Underworld Breach for all the Underworld Breach combo lines. Basically the most powerful win condition in EDH right now, if you ask me. Even more compact in a way than Thoracle, because it doesn't require you run bad cards like Thoracle itself, right? And then we have Necro. Azula is a pretty natural home for Necro. Now, Necro usually is asking you to go off on your end step with Flash Enablers, but Azula already wants you to run all these Flash Enablers anyway for her, so It's a very natural inclusion, even if it's not kind of overlapping with Azula's role. All of the enablers for Azula are also enablers for Necro, so you're just very good here. I'm choosing not to run Necro Dominance just because I think Necro Dominance is much, much worse of an effect, even if it is about as turned on as possible in this kind of flash list. And as well, um, it has the same expensive cost as Necropotence, but you can't play around the triggers the same way that Necropotence can during cleanup. And it's worse in a number of other ways, even if it is still a Necro effect. So I personally haven't found room for it. Now the lands are unremarkable. Basically the entire mana base is either fetch dual, right? So we're running the maximum number of fetches, 9 fetches, or dual lands. Because Azula is so color hungry. So for our colorless lands, we have Gemstone, Immersion Zone, Ancient Tomb. Ideally, Gemstone is never going to be a colorless mana. If it's in your opening hand, it's going to be a colored piece of mana. Immersion Zone, obviously Flash Enabler, and Ancient Tomb is just a broken land, broken soul land that adds 2 mana. I'm not sure how I feel about City of Traders. If you choose to run City of Traders in this list, it is a great turbo land option, but we're not on that many colorless rocks, but it's something to consider as well. That aside, we're also running Otawara as just an additional bounce spell, get rid of some pesky stack pieces on end step, and Arena of Glory. Arena of Glory being a haste enabler for Azula. Now, this would involve generating 4 mana for Azula, and then trying to combo on top. Now, you're going to get 2 more red mana in combat, but you're going to have to go off entirely off just red mana, which is a bit awkward, but I think the upside is worth it, so might as well run that. Other than that, all your standard rainbow lands, Confluence, Brass, Command Tower, Starting Town, even Tarnished Citadel, just like getting your colored mana under you is so important, and I'm running Urborg and Urza's Saga. It's just so important to get your access to black pips when you need it, and Saga just gives you access to these um, free mana rocks, just really helps with comboing. And yeah, this is my take on Firelord Azula, latest offering in the Grixis cEDH scene. Now this video is getting a bit long, so I think I will save the testing hands for another session potentially if there is any interest in that. But I hope you enjoyed, and good luck testing your own Avatar Commanders. Cheers.